What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So, today, speaking of Skull Merchant, I wanted to do something interesting that I never do. We're going to do a react video, because I never, ever, ever, never do these. Almost rarely, because I don't really like doing them. But, I wanted to do this one specifically, because people complain about how Behavior treats Skull Merchant. And I am about to show you guys how Riot Games treated Yorick Mori, because believe me, Skull Merchant got off good compared to this. If I decide to make this a video on the Yap channel, if you're listening to that right now, this is from, I never know how to pronounce their name, but it's, Exil. They do a lot of League of Legends videos. If you're interested in that, the link will be below. For those on the YouTube, there's the name of the channel. You can clearly see it. I can't post shit in, I can't post stuff in the chat because even my chat will get annoyed with me if I do. So I wanted to do a reaction to this. Probably not the whole thing, but at least until the point to where the rework happens, because you'll see. Also, the production value on these videos is fucking insane. I'm getting copyrighted for this.
In modern-day League of Legends, we are used to players complaining about how broken the newest champions are. We love to reminisce about the glory days of League, though often...
Does that sound familiar? Does anything that was just said sound a little familiar?
Through rose-tinted nostalgia goggles. You see, back in the glory days, Riot would never release champions like Senna, Kiana, Set, or Aphelios. These new champions are omnipresent in today's meta because more often than not, they are given all of the tools to succeed. They have overloaded and frustrating kits.
Huh. Really?
Don't even get the conversation started on how many times it also feels like they don't even know what they want to do with certain champions. Let's just take Senna. Is she an AD carry? A support? It almost feels like even they don't.
For those that don't play League of Legends, to sum this up, an AD carry is basically your damage dealer's support the AD carry and the team through utility, healing, etc., etc. Sound like Overwatch. And Senna was an AD carry support. She was designed to be both. Just saying.
No, they just need to remove some of these champions from the free week rotation, nerf them into the ground so that they're never viable, and wait for years for them to be finally reworked. Alright, okay, maybe that's a little too far. I mean, they can't just do that. Or can they? While it feels as if they only released toxic and unfair champions in 2020, historically there was a champion that rivaled these new beasts. A champion that was so unfun to play against that even the developers were trying to hide him away from the rest of the game.
Does that sound a little familiar, Dead by Daylight players? Also, I'm going to say this now because I've seen people say this on React videos. If you're annoyed or mad at me for constantly pausing the video to add commentary to the reaction, go watch the actual video. I'm not just going to steal the dude's content completely.
And discourage any new players from learning him. It left him without a home, in no place, lonely and forgotten because of him being intentionally gutted out of viability.
Huh. I'm gonna keep saying it, but the volume is a bit low. I'll turn it up. I'm gonna keep saying it, but nerfing a character out of viability so new players don't even know they exist or want to play or learn them?
It almost felt like you were forbidden to play a champion. If you take a look at champions that people hate the most in Season 10, such as this group of misfits, you often see their champion spotlights like to dislike ratio not being the best. But overall, they're mostly receiving positive reception, anywhere from 70% or higher. Even Aphelios, who has become the new Yasuo and is Reddit's new demon child, still holds a pretty okay ratio.
I should mention this was made 6 years ago, so this is before, I believe this is before YouTube got rid of the dislike ratio, so.
I figured only one other champion could rival as much hate. Surely, Teemo's Champion Spotlight would have the worst like to dislike ratio. And while it's not great, it pales in comparison to Yorick.
Jesus. It looks like my Unbreakable base kit video.
Let's go back to 2011.
So, okay, the reason we're reacting to this, Verhees, is I'm trying to draw a comparison between another game and Dead by Daylight, where people say nerfing a character into the grounds like Skull Merchant that was disliked would never happen in any other game, or like it was uncalled for. I'm trying to make the point that not only has it happened in other games, I've seen it done worse. What Behavior did was not the worst thing they could have done.
When doing these champion documentaries, we usually begin right at a champion's concept, and then we go into why they were flawed, what problems they might have had, and how the champion was reworked or changed later on down the road in order to fix these ever-longing issues. Rarely, though, do we go into why some of these older champions, specifically around the years 2010 and 2011, seem to have so many different issues.
Alright, fine, kid. I will address the black cat in the room. Yes, it happened to Black Cat as well recently. She was very widely hated, and the devs are basically trying to act like she doesn't exist anymore.
Wukong was released in 2011 with plenty of gameplay flaws and a lack of a true fluid design, whether or not he's supposed to be a jungler or a top laner. And finally, nearly a decade later, we get to see these brand new Wukong changes just recently, 9 years in the making. When looking at a timeline of League of Legends and Riot Games as a company, it is possible to piece together a potential reason for these flaws. Yorick was released in June of 2011, but earlier that year Riot Games was purchased by Tencent, the Chinese conglomerate, for a price of 400 million.
Listen, this has very little relevance to what's about to be said. I just think it's funny that Tencent gets brought up. It always makes me laugh. Yes, Tencent owns like 40% of the world. It sucks.
$1 billion, giving them a 93% stake in the company. Later on, Tencent would just go ahead and buy the rest of the company to have full ownership. Those fancy business words.
Also, someone correct me if I'm wrong. Doesn't Tencent own shares of Behavior now? I don't remember if that's true, and I feel like someone told me that, and I never looked into it. If someone knows the answer to that question and can like verify it, that would be great. But I genuinely don't know. It happened to Moji in Paladins. She was a flanker and was more annoying than good, and she got obliterated, then eventually reworked into a middling support. Oh, you mean like Sombra? It's almost like this happens all the fucking time.
Just meet a company who is using its money and power to purchase other companies so they get their money and power. They're like one big investor, and Tencent is one of the biggest companies that has ever existed.
Gaming's Disney.
Tencent's video game division is not actually a developer, they don't code for League of Legends or other games that they own, they are still technically the biggest video game company in the world. Tencent owns a few games you might have heard of. They own full control of Riot Games, who makes that small indie game known as League of Legends. Tencent also owns 80% of Grinding Gear, the company that makes Path of Exile. They also own 40% of Epic Games. I think they make some kind of shooter game. Pretty sure that's like a mobile game though. And speaking of mobile games, they also happen to own 84% of Supercell, the Finnish developer behind Clash of Clans. Oh yeah, and they also have stake in all of these games too. The point of this part of the story is not to tell you how much Tencent owns and controls your life as a gamer, as all of your favorite games are eventually going to succumb to their big dollar signs. No. Rather, this is to give you an idea of the motivation and goals behind game developers after they see a massive increase in capital. More specifically, this is to tell you about Tencent's money and the fact that they want more of it.
I mean, I've got some good news for you. McCree is still good. McCree is still very good. If anything, he probably needs a nerf these days, but that's just from me.
Riot was bought for $400 million. This was a massive move by Tencent, but it could still be seen as a huge risk. What if they never get their investment money back? After all, this is a free-to-play game, and if you told your friends that you're investing $400 million into a video game that the developers say, hey, come and play for free, they might tell you this is the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals maybe ever. The nice thing for Tencent is
that is how you know this video is fucking old. But to belabor that point a bit though, with like Overwatch is better in 2016, I honestly don't think it necessarily was. I think a lot of that comes from this idea of sorry, I'm trying to readjust this. It comes from this idea that... How do I want to sum this up? It comes from this idea that, like, part of the reason it was so good back then is because people didn't know what they were doing. That was part of the fun. And you can never get that feeling again. It happened with Rivals, too. It happened with Dead by Daylight. When Dead by Daylight first released, part of the fun was because no one knew what the fuck was going on. That's why Texas Chainsaw Massacre was fun for like the first couple weeks. And then people figured it out, and then it stopped being fun again. It's going to happen with Halloween, I can almost promise. That even the devs are trying their hardest to make sure that it doesn't happen to the Halloween game. And I kind of feel bad because I think it is something that you can't... I feel like it's something you can't really stop. It's almost impossible in today's day and age.
League of Legends does indeed have a business model, and it has everything to do with the champions themselves. In this game, it's not technically required to spend any money in order to be competitive, but the more good skins and champions that come out, the more likely your customers will feel inclined and sometimes pressured into spending their money. During this time, it's very likely that the pressure from the devs at Riot to make new champions was at an all-time high, as the higher-ups at Tencent knew that this acquisition was brand new and they were looking to make as much money as possible. More champions equals more money equals more growth, and more growth equals better game. This sounds great, but in practice you're seriously going was at an all-time high, make as much money as growth equals better.
I just want to pause this on screen. More killers equals more money equals more growth equals better game. That is how a lot of the investors for Dead by Daylight are probably looking at the game, and how many games are looked at.
Game. This sounds great, but in practice you're seriously going to miss the mark on quality. Let's take a time frame of when they released champions. For example, let's start around late 2010. Even though the purchase wasn't made public until February of 2011, we can speculate that Riot knew of this offer for months, if not way longer from before, but of course the legal details, contracting, and funding all had to be figured out, which of course can take a very long time. Let's then extend the timeline until around 6 months after it went public to give us basically 1 year of champion releases from late 2010 until late 2011. The schedule for releasing new champions during these days was something that players probably liked at
Well, Voorhees, a lot of that is just because of the nature of how TF2 works. Because how TF2 is set up in like a 12v12 situation, it allows for a lot more leeway in the gameplay. I don't know why it did, if I'm honest with you. Jen, I didn't even skim it. I don't know why it got deleted. But like, I don't think it's possible for a lot of other games. TF2 also has like, because here's the thing with like games like League of Legends, Overwatch, Dead by Daylight, they're not drop in, drop out. You can't just drop into a match of League of Legends. You can't just drop into a match of Dead by Daylight and start playing and just kind of like doing your own thing. Like, I don't know. I don't know how you accomplish that. It's impossible. I feel these days.
We used to get a new champion every 2 weeks. In fact, the release of Brand was only 11 days after releasing Lee Sin.
Could you fucking imagine that? By the way, could you imagine like You know how Rivals releases a new character like every month and a half? Could you imagine if you got a new character every 2 weeks? Jesus Christ. 2 weeks! Every 2 weeks!
To be fair, we did get a few smash hits, such as Orianna and Lee Sin, but the number of rushed, broken, almost incomplete champions on this list is quite the trip. Aurelia and LeBlanc have needed many different reworks over the years, with LeBlanc's day one release being so overpowered that she was immediately hotfixed. Swain had to be fully reworked many years later because his original release was not only a very hard to balance champion, but his champion spotlight was quite literally false advertising. Skarner has had many issues, being reworked multiple times as well, including the Juggernaut rework, which is something that
I would like to mention that this character here, Skarner, the one you see on screen, I believe as of today, he has been reworked, I think, 6 times. And he's still not good.
deserves an entire video on its own. Wukong was finally reworked after nearly 9 years just a few days ago, so it's about time for that. And Karma and Trundle were released during this time, 2 champions who have these traditional skins, which were given to champions after their reworks because their original state was so poorly designed, so badly executed, that Riot openly admitted those champions were a mistake and needed a redo. Also, in this time frame is our friend, and the main character in this story, which is Yorick. Our friend Yorick was released in June of 2011. His design was largely a new feeling, as they would take a risk with him being the first one of their champions to be designed around using and controlling some summoned minions. His theme was all about being a grave-digging necromancer, one that lets his ghouls do some of the fighting while he can still dish out some decent damage on his own. And this is important, and they note this for a key reason, as Rioters talk about how it can be very tough making a summoning-only character. That can lead to a binary pattern of gameplay where either they have their minions up and they win, or they don't have their minions up and you win. Giving Yorick more tools to do things.
I want to bring this up, by the way, before he gets into this, because Yorick, I don't think he mentioned this, Yorick at the time, and even to this day, was a very unique character. There has never been a character like Yorick. And it's one of those things where you have to ask, is it because no one thought about it? Or is it because everyone already did and realized it was a bad idea? And I bring this up because so many times I hear people say, we need more unique killers in Dead by Daylight. And my response to that is, the last time we got a unique killer, it was Skull Merchants. She was probably the most unique killer of all time. And it didn't really work out that well at all. Just saying.
Things without them also means that it's not a simple yes or no question whether or not he will win the duel. Yorick's ghouls all doing different things also meant that his skill and learning curve tied to them, with the player using the right combination of spells at certain times. Using the correct type of minion and the correct type of ghoul for the situation could reward you with some extra awesome results and make you feel like a true master over your minions rather than just spamming your buttons. All of this seems great to explain in text, but how did it actually come out? Well, let's start with the previously mentioned Champion Spotlight. This video came out one day after his release and was met with some of the worst.
Okay, so okay, so the Vecna thing, Henry. I don't think Henry is that unique. I don't think he's that unique. What is unique about him? Because his projectile's on the ground? Is it the puddle mechanic that makes him unique? At the end of the day, he's just, I shoot projectile, you dodge it or you don't. Same with Houndmaster. I don't think she's very unique either. The most unique thing about Houndmaster is the Hound Sense, or not the Hound Sense, the Trail, where she can send Snug to generators. It really depends on how reductive you want to be. But I think like a truly unique character, I think Skull Merchant was honestly the last one. I don't think we've really had like a truly unique character, because again, it just depends on how reductive you want to be. If you want to be like oh, this character throws a projectile, so they're just Huntress, but better, you can. It doesn't matter how the projectile is thrown. Even if it was a projectile that you had to, like, bounce off a wall to hit somebody, unknown, it doesn't matter. It's almost like Huntress, so it's kind. I don't even think Singularity is really... Singularity probably is unique, but... I have two theories for that. And that's a good point. Singularity, I'll give you that. Singularity is probably unique. But a lot of people don't like Singularity either.
If not the
that would be my
worst
response to that one.
On any of their champion spotlights. The general consensus was that Yorick was just terrible, super underpowered, and the champion spotlight kinda made it try to sound like he was really good when he wasn't, but the thing is, Freak sounds so uninterested doing this that I don't even really think they put in any effort into making the video.
I get jumped by LeBlanc while low on health. Unfortunately, I die, but thanks to Omen of Death, I have full control of my abilities when I respawn, so I get revenge before timing out. We catch two of our opponents in the upper jungle. I catch LeBlanc with Omen of Pestilence, and she dies to Needley's Javelin Toss. Later on, we turret dive onto Vayne. My burst damage from Omen of Pestilence and Omen of Famine get us the kill underneath the turret.
What's interesting is that in the champion spotlight, it's obvious that they are pushing him to be a top laner and that's his main role, but once he came out, the community felt very awkward playing him. They didn't know if he was supposed to be a top laner, a jungler, a mid laner even, he just didn't really seem to fit in. While this can easily be attributed to bad champion design, oftentimes a champion doesn't really have a place because they are just straight up underpowered and their numbers are too low, and that was kind of the case with Yorick. One patch after his release, he was immediately buffed. These buffs turned out to be...
I think this is another thing. I feel like other games fall into this trap too. Dead by Daylight, not so much, just because of how the game is designed, but... You know, you design a character to be played in a certain way, or like in a certain role, in a certain position, have a certain play style, and then they release, and the community doesn't do what you wanted them to do because they found a better way, or because the character is so bad on release that they can't play them in the way you wanted them to. I feel like, again, Dead by Daylight has kind of avoided this a lot. I think the last time we kind of had that happen was, what, Houndmaster, maybe? Because cameras do nothing unless it is actively controlling them. Yes, it's a weird thing. Again, it just comes down to what you define as a trap. Does a trap have to be completely uncontrolled by the player? But again, it also just depends on how reductive you want to be. Someone said that Skull Merchant's kind of similar to Hag, and I can see the argument. I don't agree with it, but I can see the argument. But you know, Hag teleports. Skull Merchant doesn't. She doesn't even really trap anymore. A lot of times she's pre-placing the drones in between loops, which you could argue is trapping, but like, again, it comes down to what you define as a trap. And it's just, again, as far as uniqueness goes, I think Larry's up there, Skull Merchant's up there. But I think other than those two, and it's funny because those two were extremely, extremely disliked, and still are to this day a bit. And I think it's not to say that you can't make a unique character. It's just to say that uniqueness doesn't always go over the way you want it to. Just because a character is different doesn't mean that they're going to be liked or well designed. As a form of area denial? Well, by that logic, then technically speaking, Knight is a trap killer. And it, like, that's where, see, and that's, again, this is the problem with archetypes, is they always have exceptions. Clown is more of an area control, but he's more of a corraller than a trap, you know? He's not trapping you. The purple bottle isn't a trap. He's trying to push you into it to get the effect. I think Knight would be considered unique. Who's better, Sadako or Pig? I mean, probably Sadako. She has map mobility. That alone shoots her up. Yeah, the trap doesn't do anything. She doesn't teleport. Yeah, that's also true. Technically, Trapper's not a trap killer if the person's injured. Uh,
Little too good for Riot's liking, so they then nerfed him the following patch. This back and forth and not knowing what they want to do with the champion would foreshadow the rest of his history. Anyway, after the players got used to the champion with some quality buffs and a bit more practice, it was clear that he was going to be a top laner. This champion clearly had a kit that could compete despite him having very little crowd control, because he could make up for that in a 1v1 by having an awesome amount of sustain. However, they ran into a problem with his kit. If you wanted to win your lane and dominate, you usually needed a blue buff because the champion had very serious mana issues. Riot would then address his mana problems directly through some changes, but the players would also discover the build path that would cement his place into the Hall of Broken.
so he's gonna go into this, and this is a very, 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 very important thing that happens with a lot of characters in a lot of games. Character releases, they're bad. They're just really bad. People talk about their pain points, why they're bad, blah blah blah, etc. etc. Then the devs buff them because of how bad they're doing and how bad they are. They do it as an emergency thing because they have to, because the players aren't having a good time with the character. Then the community figures out how to actually play and use the character, and now they also are buffed, and they become insane because you didn't give people enough time to figure it out. I know Dead by Daylight's not a complicated game, but I think Jason's a good example of this. People are talking about nerfing the character, but like, should we really be nerfing this character like a week into his release? Or should we maybe give it some time to see how good or bad he's going to end up being once the community on both sides figures things out? And I think I say this all the time. This is a massive problem with like every game on the market.
Mana Immune and Frozen Heart. Having this much mana on top of the cooldown reduction and tankiness from Frozen Heart essentially eliminated all of Yorick's weaknesses in the early to mid parts of the game. Sure, late game he could still be kited and his damage would fall off, but there's an old Yorick meme about how he used to walk into a bar and there was no counter. And undoubtedly, this was pretty true.
Such a
He
stupid
simply
joke.
stepped all over you with his mana items, and it wouldn't be a matter of can you 1v1 Yorick, it was a matter of can your champion make it out of lane, only down 40 CS instead of 100 CS down against Yorick. Arguably, he's the biggest lane bully that we've ever seen, and maybe even the best mid-game duelist we've ever seen as well. The sustain along with strong early damage just couldn't be matched, and it was only a matter of time before his pushing and healing strategy would overrun your lane, and you were forced to give up your tower or get dove and give it up anyway. On top of that,
So for League of Legends, for League or for Dead by Daylight terms, this would be the equivalent of a character who shows up in a loop, uses their power, or almost uses their power, and it forces you to leave the loop. That's the equivalent of this. But every time. Every single time. Or a character that is able to literally stall the game out for an hour so the servers shut down.
junglers would try to camp Yorick and set him behind, but the threat of being 1v2'd was so high that it would always be a risk. Junglers and the power of jungle champions during this era was just much lower than it is today, and in general players have become leaps and bounds better at the game. Nowadays, this kit would still be an incredible lane bully, but an excellent Lee Sin or Nidalee player in Season 10 would probably camp the Yorick as hard as possible and set him back so their laner could breathe. This is a concept that was understood in 2011, but was less likely to happen. The main drivers behind his ridiculous laning phase were his W and his E. Omen of Famine was the most nerfed part about his old kit, having a couple of different iterations. Balancing this level of sustain and his War of Attrition proved nearly
Oh, a War of Attrition, the thing everyone loves. I love Wars of Attrition, personally. I think they're really fun, but in character design in the PvP video game, they are not fun to play against. They never have been. And again, Skull Merchant was like the poster child of Wars of Attrition. It was literally who lost patience first. That's what it came down to. Also, that comment about Clash Royale, where you release something super busted and then nerf them 2 weeks later after you get everyone's money. Again, that's not just a Dead by Daylight thing. That's an every video game thing. And there are two reasons they do that. Because you'll notice that characters in most games come out in one of two states. Most times. They're either extremely overpowered or extremely underpowered. There's rare situations where they come out just like okay. And there's a reason for this. A lot of times when you're releasing a character, it is better to release them overpowered because, one, first impressions matter, and two, it is a lot easier most times to nerf a character than buff them. A lot of times when a character comes out underpowered, it's usually because their kit or what they do is vastly unique and the devs weren't able to compensate or properly understand how strong it was or weak it was going to be. As far as overpowered goes, again, it is a lot better to release a character overpowered and nerf it them because, one, first impressions matter a lot. Houndmaster is a very good example of this. She came out really bad. It wasn't just because she was underpowered, but it was also because she was buggy. But even nowadays, where yes, she still is buggy, but even her strength is often debated because of her initial release. Clown suffers from this too. A lot of people still don't think Clown is that good because of his initial release. It matters. It matters a lot. If a character comes out overpowered and is slightly nerfed, or even like majorly nerfed, it's a lot easier for people to kind of justifiably see where they actually land. Kaneki is a good example of this to a degree, where he was massively overpowered on release and he was nerfed. And now he's still good, but not nearly as good as he was. So like it does matter.
Really impossible. If you don't nerf this ability, then he is the king of top lane. But if you nerf it even slightly, well, that's the only good part of his kit, and if it gets hit, his lackluster late game and practically zero crowd control basically leaves the champion without anything to offer. Omen of Pestilence and Omen of War love to work together to make Yorick a very frustrating champion to get away from and to catch, with his Q giving him movement speed and his W applying a slow. One very peculiar thing about the champion as well is that he was meant to build AD, and for the most part, yes, he did, but his abilities did magic damage, so you—
What would I rather play against? The Walking Dead patch Mega Haste Clown or an hour-long Merchant? Clown. I would rather the match just be over with. And never getting past the initial trauma? Yes. Except for new players. That is the thing. People will hate the character, but people will play the character still. Even if they're nerfed into like a point of irrelevancy, the fact that their initial release allowed them to be broken for at least a little bit kind of softens the blow. It is, again, a lot better than the other way around. And also, like I said, it is a lot easier most times to nerf something than buff something. Buffing things is a very finicky thing. Nerfing it isn't. Because buffing something too much leads them into that overpowered state. Nerfing something too much will lead them into an underpowered state, but you can usually adjust that and come back from that. Doing it the other way around, there's usually no coming back from it. Because if you buff something that's not good, and it becomes really good, and people start to enjoy how strong it feels, nerfing it is going to feel like a slap in the face again. And yes, that's a little contradictory, but it's usually how most companies have to do it. I'm not saying it's the correct way to do it, I'm just saying it's how a lot of them have to do it.
You had a champion that did a lot of damage through auto attacks and building a lot of AD, but if you wanted to build against him and stack some armor, which is totally what you think would be reasonable, well, then if you.
Okay, so I'm gonna just skip ahead a little bit.
In spite of this, I think his ultimate was the coolest part about the old Yorick, and it would have a couple of different pick website. Funny enough, if you actually look closely, almost every single champion says weak against Yorick. He also shows his match history where traditionally he was not known for playing Yorick, but rather champions like Wukong, yet on Yorick he was practically winning every single game.
That's also very funny. It's like this character counters everything in the game. Oh, okay. That would be more like Blight than Skull Merchant, but
his
still.
YouTube channel talking about how strong Yorick was, and the Rain Man, the OG top laner for TSM, talked about how he was abusing Yorick to climb to rank 1 on one of his vlogs. He personally discovered how good Yorick was after he played his main, which was Teemo, and he got absolutely clobbered by a Yorick, so he decided to pick it up and learn the champion. So at this point, everybody figured out that he was completely impossible to lane against, and during the Ignite meta of top lane, this effect was only amplified. Top lane was known as the 1v1 lane back then, the island, the place where you pick the strongest possible champion you can master, and you try to outduel your opponent. Bad news is, unless your champion was Yorick, you probably lost. During these days, we would see some consecutive nerfs to him, with some of them being quite substantial hits. It's also not quite understood when exactly this happened, but after years of playing the game, some players noticed they had never seen Yorick in the free week rotation. The free rotation is used to allow newer players and veterans alike to try out a brand new champion that they don't own. They can play them while they're still on a free week in normal games to try to find out if they like to play that champion. It gives them a chance to say, hey, I really like that champ, but I'm not sure if I want to spend my hard-earned either real money or in-game currency on them, so let me give them a try. I might even find a new main. When you're first starting...
So, okay, just to give you the idea of what happened here, to explain this. This would be like if Dead by Daylight had 3 characters every week. It's like, oh, this week, I don't fucking know, who's an original. Like, this week, Singularity's free for all players to try, right? And then, all of a sudden, they're like, you never see them in the free rotation anymore. This is what they did. They removed him from the free rotation week, so new players couldn't try the character. They never said it publicly, they just secretly did it. He didn't show up for, like, I think 6 years?
In the game and you're a noob, this feature is really important because you do not have the IP in order to buy every champion. But what about Yorick? It's speculated that him and Poppy were removed from the free week rotation to deter players from playing him because ultimately Riot knew his kit was very unhealthy. They knew he was broken. They were quite literally trying to hide the champion away from the game. Almost ashamed that they ever even put him out there.
Does that sound a little familiar? Does that sound a little familiar about another... I'm just, again, it's like it happens in so many games, not just Dead by Daylight. And I know League of Legends is a really popular game and a really big game. It's been around for years. That's why I use it as an example all the time. They've gone through some of the same shit DBD has gone through.
After he ran victory laps through top lane for several months during 2011 and 2012, Riot would gut him, effectively removing him from viability for several years. They didn't want this champion to work. They did not want him to work his way back into the meta, and he was reserved to be reworked and never even allowed to exist in his old state. Unfortunately, this waiting period for his rework would go on for far too long. As you probably know, we wouldn't get his rework until 2016, more than 5 years after he came out. But in 2013, there was a Riot post explaining that a Rioter was working on Yorick's rework and it was in development. They were going to do something big with his kit, but we never got to see this.
The amount of parallels, other than the strength part, they're just insane. They're just insane. Like, the amount of parallels to this. Also, can I show the sponsored segment? I don't think there is one in this video. I will if there is. I don't think there is, though.
His lane dominant days were over, and the only thing that made the champion viable was completely removed. But if we fast forward to 2015, something amazing happened with Yorick. In my video covering the history of the best off-meta picks, I covered Unicorns of Love and Vizicachi's infamous Yorick game. UOL was the European LCS ragtag group of young talent that had everything to prove and nothing to lose, and they were often known for picking off-meta champions. Chachi, their top laner, had played champions like Poppy in the past, their jungler Kikis played Shaco and Udyr, and Power of Evil invented mid lane Varus, something that would become popular for years to come after he first pulled it out on stage. In one of the best and most exciting professional League of Legends games anyone has ever seen, UOL pulled out a Yorick top lane, something that we had not seen in the pros for a very long time.
5-second cooldown at rank 5.
Oh my
Which
word,
obviously
what
is
is
a lot of slows.
happening?
This is crazy. I mean, this patch, man. Now we're running an old school Yorick Cassiopeia composition where you have this suicide mid laner who just goes bazookas on the enemy team, and then you resurrect her once she dies. I mean, this is a Yorick top lane now from Vizicachi.
The casters, Deficio and Quickshot, spoke about the Unicorns running an old school Yorick comp. One of the few unspoken strengths of the old Yorick was his ultimate. What made him so broken was his laning phase and sustain, but his ult was still a very good late game tool for a funnel strategy, very similar to what we see today with
But for those that didn't listen to what he was saying before about the ultimate, what his ultimate used to do is you could basically select one of your teammates and if they died, they came back to life for a few seconds before they died again.
something like a Master Yi and Taric. If Yorick is able to press R on a super fed carry on his team, his job is done, because even if his carry dies, they will have 10 more seconds to dish out damage and do their thing. Maybe some of the optimistic League of Legends fans thought that we would be treated with more Yorick picks after this game because they did win and they did beat Fnatic, but it was more of the same after that because essentially nobody played this champion. He was easily the most unpopular champion in the game, right along with the likes of Urgot and Poppy, and all three of these champions have been reworked at this point. But that's not to say there wasn't at least one player who played him. In fact, there was a famous Yorick player who consistently got to Challenger, Inverted Composer. This guy has reached legendary status in the history of
There's always one. There's always one.
League of Legends because nobody else played Yorick at this time.
That one
Nobody
dude,
else was playing
always.
Yorick at this incredibly high elo, but he did. How did he do it? Well, it was through a combination of incredible skill and game knowledge on the champion. You have to understand the champion perfectly, not just good enough, but perfectly. Also, the surprise factor of Yorick could begin to work in your favor, even against the best of the best challenger level pros. Because it was a once a year event to even see a Yorick in game, let alone have to lane against him, it was pretty easy to forget the strengths and the weaknesses of the champion.
A character that is so unpopular you never see them, so when you do see them, it's like so much shell shock you don't know what to do against it. God, the parallels.
Challenger players would get dove under their tower by Yorick, and somewhat embarrassingly too, as you were now the guy on stream being the person who feeds against the worst champion in the game. This could easily tilt you and cause you to play even worse, and because Inverted Composer was good enough at the champion, if he did get his lead, he could usually close out the game and grab the win. He is one of the relics of this game, one of the OGs, and is the living example that no matter how many excuses you want to make and how bad you want to complain about certain champions, about your strategies being underpowered and off meta, it does not always have to limit you and your potential. But that story aside, where are we now? Well, if we look at Yorick's timeline of changes from late 2012 all the way to the end of 2016, 4 full years, this is a list of all of Yorick's changes. Yep.
Wow, it's like they kind of just let the champion rot after they nerfed him or something before the rework.
He was completely forgotten. This is all he got in 4 years. He was waiting to be revived by a rework. Funny enough, the Gravedigger champion kind of needed to be dug out of his grave and revived just like his ghouls. Finally, on August 19th, 2016, we got our first teaser for the new reworked Yorick, just about 5 years after his original release. The hype around this rework at the time was super strong because of the fact that we all knew he was going to be reworked. It was just so long overdue that most players expected it to be epic. The Champion Spotlight and his trailer were awesome, and I felt that visually this is one of the better upgrades we've ever seen, right along with the Poppy rework. They did a very nice job of nailing his thematic and making him feel up to date with the modern games. In terms of his overall theme, I feel like it's a knock-up job. But what about his gameplay? Some thought it was pretty cool, and his popularity has obviously increased over the years because of the rework. It's very hard to not call this a successful update, because if you compare it to what he was before, it's not all that hard. All they had to do was take the literal worst designed champion in the game and make him better. However, that does not mean that everyone is satisfied. For starters, once again, his Champion Spotlight was misleading. At 6 minutes, it's shown that Yorick is able to use his new Q.
So, yeah, waiting 5 years for a rework? Oh man, that's the other thing. Like I said, 5 years. People waited 5 years or technically 4, because he was fine for the first year. But he was nerfed into the ground, and he was left in that state basically for 4 years before his rework. 4 years. He wasn't the only one. They did this to about 5 other characters, by the way. Yorick is just probably one of the more notables. And again, like, the reason I'm bringing this up isn't to say, like, woe is me. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it could be worse, guys. It could be so much worse for Skull Merchant. At the very least, she is playable. Like, yes, she's not that good, but she's not, like... Okay, she is dog shit, at least compared to the other killers. But, like, at least, like, you can use her.
On towers and inhibitors, not only for an auto attack reset, but also the bonus damage. But this was not a feature that was in his kit. In fact, it wasn't added until more than a year later in patch 7.22. And the community cited this as a massive buff where he will now destroy side lanes and push way too fast. But it seems like this was something that was already intended to be in his kit, we just never got it. Regardless, when he first came out, many players tried to pick up the champion thinking his playstyle would be so similar to the old Yorick, just with a fresh coat of paint and a more fair laning phase. But this wasn't the case at all. Gone were the mana items, the absurd laning phase, sustain, and war of attrition. Instead, he was all about late game split pushing and getting to the side lane. Yorick was also given most of his power into the champion instead of the ghouls, now known as Mistwalkers. They really...
Like... This is the thing, and I bring this up, and it's, you know, it took him a year to add that one thing. Like I said, as someone who used to play games like League of Legends, I waited, like, there were some characters, again, who were so bad in this game, you would have to wait literal years for them to be in a position where people would consider them playable. Like, it's one of those things where, like, I'm kind of used to it. It's not me saying be grateful necessarily. It's me saying you kind of have to deal with the hand you're dealt. It's not saying don't ask for better. It's just sometimes you kind of have to just be like, okay, this is the situation we have at hand. What do we do about it? And that's all you can do. Skull Merchant's bad? Okay, maybe don't play Skull Merchant. Ghostface is bad? Maybe don't play Ghostface. I get it, you like the character. If you can make it work, make it work. But until they buff the character to a degree where they're good, you kind of can't play the character. I'm just, like, in the way you want to. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it's working. In an ideal world, every character in every game would be viable and good and work all the time. But that's just not how it works. Especially in a game that constantly changes things around it, that inherently nerf the character just by existing. And that's why I'm kind of bringing up Yorick a bit here, because he was directly nerfed. Skull Merchant was directly nerfed, but they were also kind of shunned out because of how the game changed around them after their nerfs as well.
Really only become powerful if you land your E, which is a skill shot, and even then, compared to his old ghouls, it's just not even close. Instead, his power budget is now aligned with his Q, acting just like some other powerful auto attack resets. This is his bread and butter, but chasing people down can still be a little difficult because you kind of need to land both your skill shots with your W and your E.
Okay, I am going to skip ahead. I'm not skipping an ad or anything, but there's only like one other thing I really want to talk about in this video.
Who know how the champion works. This is for players who aren't good enough, so they get punished. Their aim was to make things easier to play against because the opposition doesn't understand why they're bad, so wreck them.
Okay, this point right here is another thing I want to bring up.
And they don't know what the ult does, and he seems to win quite a bit because the games on average go much longer. This causes his weaker early game and lack of a lot of good matchups to not be as relevant. He has posted some record high win rates in lower tiers, which has caused Riot to nerf him several times for this reason, but I feel as if these changes are not just a crime to Yorick, but in a broader scope, a very problematic way to change and balance any competitive game. On 8.17, we got a nerf to Yorick, but it is the wording that bothers me the most. Top laners have unearthed Yorick as a dominant pick, in part due to the threat of his Mistwalkers. Players who understand the Mistwalkers' behavior and actively play around it avoid a lot of damage, while players who don't find themselves digging their own graves. We're toning down the damage of Mistwalkers to decrease his low-level pub stomp potential.
I'm going to leave this up for a second. I want you to read exactly what was just said. They nerfed him because bad players were getting destroyed by him. People that didn't understand how he worked were losing too much. So they had to nerf him for those players.
A dominant pick, in part due to the threat of his Mistwalkers. Players who understand the Mistwalkers' behavior and actively play around it avoid a lot of damage, while players who don't find themselves digging their own stomp potential. The problem is that they use a lack of understanding from the players as a reason to go ahead and make changes. They say themselves his power doesn't seem excessively strong for players who know how the champion works. This is for players who aren't good enough, so they get punished. Their aim was to make things easier to play against because the opposition doesn't understand why they're bad, so let's just make them less bad. This is frustrating as a player of League of Legends and in general, not just for Yorick players, because I'm not one. When developers openly admit that the only reason they're making a change is because some players aren't learning and aren't good at the game, and that's not fun for them, well, I would have to say that's probably the worst way to go about designing a game.
Basically, what he just said is nerfing or balancing the game around bad players is not a good way to balance a game. I don't fully disagree with him. I just think it's funny.
Counter-Strike. I only have put in about 50 hours into the game, and I can't handle the AK. I haven't learned and mastered its recoil pattern, and I don't understand the gun even a fraction of the way that a professional does. But that doesn't make it right for Valve to just fix the AK for me and make it have pinpoint accuracy and no recoil pattern, because that's part of the learning curve of the game. Only a small fraction of the old school RuneScape player base has bested the Inferno, one of the hardest PvM or PvE challenges in any MMO. What makes it so difficult is the longevity of the fight, the massive gear requirement to even stand a chance, and the deep understanding of the mechanics and its waves. Just because I can't do an Inferno does not mean that Jagex should just make it easier so I can get an Infernal cape. You're riding a dangerous line because you don't necessarily want to say too bad get good, but at the same time you sort of have to, because what is the purpose of the game and of the champion if learning him isn't rewarding enough and learning how to be good against him isn't even punishing? I don't think.
So here's the thing with this. I think there's a line with the whole get good mentality. I think we saw this a lot with Ghoul, because there was definitely counterplay to Ghoul. We also We also saw this a bit with Chucky as well, where there were counters to these characters. There were ways to play around them, but it was so inconsistent and difficult to do unless you were super good at the game that they kind of had to nerf the characters into the ground. Now, I know some people will argue like they were both brain dead, and to a degree they were, but not always. I think, Ghoul getting that first hit basically for free is part of the brain deadness and the vaulting thing. But in other situations, I've said it before, Chucky and Ghoul were very good at countering the whole W thing. They were both very good at it. That's why they were successful. I always clocked Chucky as an anti-killer because a lot of what countered him was stuff that other killers didn't care about. For example, the best way to counter old Chucky was to stay at a trash loop. A loop that isn't that good were good loops against Chucky, but not any other killer, which is confusing and makes no sense, and it's cognitive dissonance. So if you have a character like that in that situation, what do you do? On top of that, if most of your player base is in that quote-unquote bad tier, and they are losing because they can't understand the character or don't understand the character, and it's frustrating them to a point to where they're leaving the game, what do you do as a developer? That's why this is like not such a black and white issue, and I don't think he's painting it as one either. I think he's going into why it's kind of hard to do it in the first place. But this ideal world of top-down balancing where we only balance things around the best players just doesn't work all the time. It can work, but not all the time. Again, the get good mentality has a line that the developers try to walk all the time. I'm not saying they do it correctly all the time. Hell, I'm not even saying they do it correctly most of the time. But it is a line they have to walk.
I think Riot has done a completely horrible job with Yorick. In fact, some of the buffs and quality of life changes that he's been given are not the worst things they could have done. I just don't think that this approach is what's fair. Ultimately, I'm not a game developer, nor am I a game designer with 200 years of collective experience. But I have an honest question to ask them. If it's perfectly okay to say a champion is way too pub stompy, what do you do about champions that only dominate at the highest level? Akali clearly needs buffs for lower elo, as she rocks the single lowest win rate in the game for silver and gold. But of course, they can't do that because players would see that she's too problematic for professional play and the pros would run rampant. But in the first example with Yorick, the lower rated players were the ones being addressed, and a champion was nerfed because they dominated lower ranks. But why would weaker champions in lower elo not be buffed? When you're strictly talking about buffing champions, why is it the professionals that get preferential treatment, but when it comes to nerfing champions, it's actually the lower rated players that get treated? Learning and improving in this game and feeling like you finally overcame something that you were struggling to beat is what makes all of these games interesting. Just waiting for a champion to be nerfed rather than doing everything you can to learn how to play against it and come up with some counter strategy is way more interesting than spamming refresh on surrender at 20 hoping for new nerfs. Maybe all along that's what we did wrong with the original Yorick too. You see, at the very beginning of this story, I told you that the old Yorick was the most broken and unfair champion to lane against in the game's history. I told you it was a good thing that he was locked away by nerfs. I told you the champion should have been buried, and he was. Riot was so ashamed of the champion they didn't even want you to try him. They knew that he was broken, and so badly needed a fully reworked kit. And I mostly do agree with that. But I also mentioned that in today's game, maybe he wouldn't have been that strong, because a good Lee Sin or a good...
And again, this is another problem with reworking characters. Or nerfing them, like when they first come out. The game is going to naturally change around them, and maybe they're not going to be that strong in like a year or two because of how the game itself has progressed. And that's another thing you have to be careful with, and I feel like developers try to be careful with it. But if outcry is enough, they can't. And that's another thing that isn't even... That's another thing that's not even really being addressed a lot in this video necessarily, but like, how much outcry does a developer need to hear from their player base? Should majority rule on any decision made by the community. Because I saw someone mentioning that we should do a community patch for like every game. A game where the community comes together and makes a patch that like quote unquote fixes the whole game. But how would we even go about that? Because we all have different ideas on how every game should work. What should be buffed, what should be nerfed. Do we go by majority opinion? Because oftentimes we say that we shouldn't go off majority opinion. Should we only go off the pros' opinions? The people who are good at the game? Well, then the people who are bad at the game kind of feel left out. What if they're the majority? Now they feel left out. Now you're alienating most of your player base. So again, none of these answers to any of this are black and white. And I feel like that's part of the problem killers like Skull Merchant, Ghoul, Chucky. To be fair, I think Chucky is actually fine now. But who's another one? Blight, Nurse, Ghostface, Trapper. None of them have solid answers on what we should do to fix them. And it's such a hard thing to nail correctly. Especially when you're trying to keep the original design of a character intact, at the very least their original identity. And I said this so many times with Trapper. The problem with buffing Trapper, the problem with reworking Trapper, or whatever you do to him, if he is not man who sets down bear traps, he is no longer Trapper. And you have to find a way to do that in a way that's both viable and good, but also in a way that doesn't remove who he is and how he plays. And by the logic of him being a trap character, he's relying on people making mistakes to get the most out of his power. And that's the problem he has, and I don't know how you fix that while keeping him as Trapper. Again, you can make him start with all the traps. You can make him have 5 traps. You can make his traps automatically reset. The thing is, almost none of these things fix the core issue. If the survivors don't walk in the trap, he doesn't do anything. And to bring us back around to Skull Merchant, again, that's my fear with her rework, if it ever happens, which I'm pretty sure it's not, is how do we keep the identity of a killer that uses drones to kind of buff herself and debuff the other people while also getting information? Like, there's...
Nidalee jungler might have just camped the Yorick to counter him, and that got me thinking. What if this Yorick nerf, and Riot's philosophy of nerf him because players are too bad to play against him, wasn't all that different from the original kit? What if we were all just too bad at the game to beat him? What if there was something that we didn't think of? What if we didn't try every single matchup to try to find his counter? This was so long ago at this point. Players were much worse at the game. Is Yorick, both in his original state and this one, the premier example of why game developers should have a more hands-off approach, a living proof in 2 completely different yet shockingly similar examples of why we should buff rather than nerf? The Yorick theory. Why get good is always the best way to balance your game.
I would like to mention that he put competitive at the bottom of that, and we can't even agree if Dead by Daylight is competitive. So just take that as a grain of salt for DVD.
I hope you all enjoyed this video.
So that was basically Exel going through Yorick's history. And again, the only reason I went through this is because the parallels to Skull Merchant and like other characters in Dead by Daylight are ridiculous to me. It is insane how many similarities there are. And it's just like, again, like no developer has figured this out. None of them have. No one knows how to do it perfectly. And yes, I'm not saying behavior is perfect and that they can't fix things. They obviously should. But even that last bit that he talked about is another good point. This idea of, what if we just don't touch anything for a while and see if the community can figure it out? And ironically, I think the devs have been doing that Dead by Daylight, not on purpose, mind you. But I feel like they have been doing that and it's clearly not working. I don't know. Also, someone said let Trapper throw his traps. Here's the problem with letting Trapper throw his traps. Also, if you're listening on the YouTube side of things, I'm probably going to make this a video on the Yapping channel, I guess. But thank you. You should definitely watch the video in full. I know I skipped around a little bit, and I paused a lot, and sometimes I didn't pause that much. Regardless, you should definitely watch it. Exel is an amazing, amazing creator. I love his videos. I don't even play League that much anymore, and I still watch his videos. They're great.